And we're live.
And
No video today, intro or outro, because all the cool kids are over at Ride of Boom,
Right of boom.
and we're just here to fill in to make sure that this continues because it's important. And discussing great things about the MSP space
Well, and I've
is
never been
always
accused of
fun.
being a cool kid, so you wouldn't find me at the cool kids
You were
place.
100% a cool kid. We just weren't invited to the cool kids table.
Yeah, okay,
We'll just
that's fair.
we have our own table.
We did. That's how cool we are.
Exactly. We made our own one. So how are you, Marnie?
I'm good. How are you? I'm ready for spring. How are you?
Is it not? I mean, it's March. It was hot yesterday. Now it's cold today. So
Yeah, yeah.
we don't know what it is. I don't. At least
Just
I
because
don't.
I'm ready doesn't mean Mother Nature's going to follow along.
Absolutely. So, Marnie, will you introduce yourself to those who are watching
Absolutely.
and
Hi,
listening?
all. I am Marnie Stockman. I was co-founder and CEO of Lifecycle Insights, which is now a ScalePad company. And so I wrote some MSP handbooks around QBRs and the SASE edition with some friends in the space. And I just wrote Lead It Like Lasso.
That is, I love some Ted Lasso. We could probably talk about Ted Lasso for a long time.
For sure.
So, as someone who communicates a lot with a lot of individuals in a lot of different aspects from
Yeah.
the top level all the way down. I know that is one thing that not just MSPs, but most people struggle with. How, in your opinion, how do you approach dealing with communication?
Well, in all ways, at all times is the key, right? So number one thing that I see is that lack of communication is the first thing to cause drama. So imagine, I mean, you have people putting in tickets all the time. What is the number one thing they hate is if you don't respond at all. They would rather hear, yes, it's broken and it's going to be broken for 17 and a half hours than hear nothing. So I think one of the biggest issues is poor communication. So how to fix that is to have established rules and guidelines around communication and then know your own personal strategy. So when I say that, does that make sense? Do you know your own personal communication strategy?
Uh, be adaptive is how I generally go about it. Because I like different people talk and communicate is probably the better way to do it because it's not just talking. Communicate
Yeah.
in different areas and different methods and different tones and languages. So I try to be as adaptable as possible so that I can take the information I have and communicate it as effectively as possible on their level.
Yeah. I we had the first person we hired at Lifecycle Insights felt like we'd set the expectations. And part of good communication is about setting expectations. It's part of the key to customer success, right? How to be proactive instead of reactive. If you can make preemptive strikes on things, you're in better shape. After 6 months, it was pretty clear that even if we had communicated our needs, it wasn't happening. So we had to let that person go. It was interesting because they definitely were not surprised. So I'd at least communicated the concerns we had along the way.
Great.
So
That's
yeah,
fantastic.
that is absolutely, that was the easiest. I don't like firing people. Those are the worst days of my life. Nothing makes me want to throw up more than having to do that.
Amen.
But yeah, when I got to it, actually they knew and weren't surprised at all. So did some part of the communication right. But after that, we actually created a communication guide, and they'll put it in the chat or the link or wherever it is, wherever it pops up on the magic screen. So we actually created a communication guide so that I could share the way I communicated, but we also had our new employees then share the way they communicated. And some of it, to your point, you said it's not just about talking. There are lots of other ways to communicate. So I made the expectation of I'm an immediate or might not going to happen kind of girl when it comes to communication. So I would tell them, if you have these types of topics, I want that in a chat message and I will respond immediately if I'm not on a call. And I expect the same from you, and I can see your calendar. right? So that's pretty telling. If you're not on a call and you're not at lunch or wherever, like I expect an immediate response. And it was kind of funny just yesterday. So I put my personal operating system, my communication guide in the book that we wrote. And yesterday somebody called to ask me to be a speaker at an event. And she said, I read your book. It said you don't call anyone before 8 a.m. So I waited until after 8 because I figured you didn't want to be called before that either. I was like, this is brilliant. I've just published the way I want people to talk to me to the world. That's great.
It is. So what about automated communication? Like, we're not always, as MSPs, we're not always able to immediately grab that phone call or immediately answer that ticket that just came in via email. And so generally we say, hey, we just want to acknowledge that we got your ticket. And as soon as we get to it, so you think that type of communication is okay, as long as it's clear that it's automated, right? You don't want to pretend to be something you're not.
Oh, 100%, because that'll get you in trouble. So I like yep, this is your automated response saying we got your ticket. A human's going to see this in X number. So the keys to communication are to acknowledge that who is in charge of the next step and when that next step should happen. So if you're not sure, you then need to give them an out of when they can harass you again. Right. And I will tell people, I am going to do this as soon as I get back to my desk. So unknown time limit, but along with that, I will say, Kyle, if you haven't heard from me in 24 hours, harass me again. Right? Give them permission. So they're not wondering and they know when the next step is going to happen. So in your automation, I assume it gets okay, automated reply. We've received your ticket. You know, the next time somebody is free, we will get back to you. Do you add a time period of when that might happen? Do you tell them you're third in the queue, you've got a 47-hour wait, anything along those lines?
No, because it's hard to predict that.
Yeah.
If it also depends on the issue. Like if you call in for a password reset, or you call in for something that should be quick, then we generally try to get you to the next available person in that section that we have carved off for those types of issues. And we generally, if they're on the phone, we'll generally give them an estimate. Hey, look, they're on the other line. You're next in queue. So they'll give you a call as soon as they're done with what they're doing, and it should be 15, 20 minutes. But if it's an email, that generally doesn't happen, because unfortunately, communication is always a two-way street, and people providing information. But the thing that I try to remind as many people as I can is sometimes they don't understand how to communicate whatever the thing. Like they can just say, this doesn't work. Right. This action no longer does what it's expected to do.
PowerPoint's down. What?
Yeah. I don't blame anyone for not understanding a specific situation, but that makes us harder because then it's effectively zero information at that point. It's from scratch. We have to figure out what the actual issue is before we can actually fix it. So being able to identify those will allow us to be able to set expectations, but until we get to that point, we can't set the proper expectations. So unfortunately,
you're stuck.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you do anything to train your clients on what to put in a good ticket. When I worked in the ed tech company, we would get a lot of the crazy, I can't see Marnie's scores. And you're like, what report are you in? What class are you teaching? What? That is insanely not helpful. So we actually would do trainings around what a good use case looks like, because that's what people are like, well, can't you, they don't want you to be able to see your stuff, but they assume you can see all the things. And well, I just clicked through all of this, and don't you know that? So do you do any training around this is the best way to get fastest support from us?
We try.
How about ticket templates? You make them fill in blanks?
We do. For specific, for new user creations and stuff like that, we do, because there's a lot of information that they want to provide to us and give us, or they may forget about. So their specific process has a specific form that they fill out to open that ticket. And that's why we have all the information we need to proceed. without having to constantly call them back and say, hey, what about this? Or hey, what about this? So we have everything, just it makes it a little easier, less touches to get that. But as far as other situations, we try to give us as much information as you can in the initial tickets. But that's really it. We have multiple ways to get in contact with us: phone, automated tickets on the desktop. We use help desk buttons, and email, obviously, right? Those are the so those are the main methods of getting in contact with us, and they all have different aspects of which are best.
Do you have a preferred?
Generally, yeah, email.
Email, really, not in a ticketing, not through help desk.
Yeah, well, I mean, help desk buttons is great. I consider both of those would be, in my opinion, email.
Okay, wait.
But there is
I asked a question, but I think I know I have the wrong answer based on the way I asked it. Your email goes straight to a ticketing system.
Correct.
Is that true? Okay.
Yes.
All right. And so really ticketing is exactly what you want to have happen. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Phone calls are great for small, quick things, but because of how the MSP works, it's hard to get someone who's not already on a call or not in the middle of doing something already. So that adds complexity, and that pushes people down the queues, and there's so many adjustments that have to happen. So we have a specific team dedicated to answering our phones, and a specific team dedicated to fixing quick things like password resets and small issues. And then everything else will escalate to the team, and they have a queue based on when it was put in, and they'll work it priority and then by age, basically. It's just hard to be able to. I would love to be able to have someone just waiting to answer your phone and begin working your ticket. It's really, really hard to be able to sit down and do that.
Yeah. So when I ran customer success for the ed tech company, every customer success manager they ran about 2 million in revenue worth of clients. So for some people that was 2 clients that were huge, and for other people it was 40 clients that were a lot smaller. But because the companies had direct access to a customer success manager, they would often try to circumvent support tickets by going straight to a customer success human. And it was interesting because we customer success people, we are helpers and we want to please everybody. And we found a lot of times that, and I was guilty of it when I first started. I could just do the password reset myself. So I would do it. Right. But then what we found is that we were actually masking technical issues because we were creating loopholes, workarounds, et cetera. So they didn't realize
you were solving the symptom, not the actual problem.
That's exactly right. There were actually 17 password resets in the same 15 minutes, but nobody knew about it because the 17 customer success managers all dealt with it. So we really had to train our team to funnel it to the proper. That's why I asked, is email, in fact, your ticketing system? Because we were getting personal emails that didn't land.
That happens too. We're social people, right? We like making the connections, and having that in with someone is always great. Like I have the cell phone of high level individuals at companies I work with, but I refuse to use them unless I absolutely need to, because I also know that they're busy, and I'm going to do my best to follow the process that they have, because I don't want to, because I also want people to follow my process that I have for the MSP I work at. So I don't want to abuse that system unless I absolutely need to. And so it's the exact same thing. I don't want to, because we get that same problem, and we try to communicate, hey, if you want quicker response times, if you want people to jump on this, you have to follow the process. Otherwise it could get lost in my 800 emails that I get per day. And I don't want that to happen to you.
This is in fact better for you. Yeah. Well, so people would call or text me, and so even if I'm like literally sitting in my kitchen doing nothing, I would say, oh, I'm on the road right now, so I'm going to call in support or forward this to a ticket, right? I would do something to, even if they got me, say, oh, I'm traveling, I can't get to my computer, whatever. so that this has to go through this system, not because I didn't want to help them with their problem. And when you give them the path to the solution, like back to communication, they're like, great, like you're still solving my problem. And yes, there is an extra step, but in fact, that step is critical along the way.
So how do you teach? What, in your opinion, what's the best way to teach those who aren't very good at communication or who may not be able to communicate very well? How do you teach them to be better at communication?
So first, they need to understand why it's important. And I think the best strategy for that is to show counterexamples, right? It's hard to identify what's good. Like if you watch a professional baseball player, you can say like, wow, he's good, right? But you would at no point, I wouldn't be able to say because he's doing these things correctly, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to if you show the counterexample, they're like, well, let me show you my 9-year-old son, right? Oh, okay. I see what we're doing, right? Whatever the case may be. So I think counterexamples are really powerful. So let's talk about what happens when someone doesn't get a response right away. They make up a story for themselves. They feel like they haven't been heard. So then what happens? So then they call Kyle directly on his cell phone. They call their customer success manager. They send in an email. They put in a ticket. They hit click help desk. So they've now caused 5 problems because they didn't get an automated response saying, yep, we got you, right? They're just trying to make sure they got taken care of. So I like to show what can happen on the bad end if we don't communicate well, so that they acknowledge like, yes, okay, this is mission critical that we get this right. Then the next point is what do we put in the communications? So, at Lifecycle Insights, there weren't many of us, but the one engineer, he's like, I'm not customer facing. So Marnie, can you make this sound better and more appropriate? But we also spent time to show examples of the right way to ask questions that sounded positive and supportive instead of just, it's typically, in the sake of brevity, it comes out harsh and cold, right? So examples of,
They
this is
provide
one,
facts. They don't
yeah,
provide it's just facts. That's all. And that's as a technician, I understand that because I want
correct,
facts. I don't want nuance. I don't want tone. I want to understand what the issue is, and I can't get
correct.
that unless you give me facts.
Yeah. And so that is where, we always set up templates for our customers in order to say, like, this is what we need so that our engineers understand what the problem is. But the reverse of that is true, is we would train the engineers on basically some prompts that they could use to communicate back, to even the playing field on the way the conversation's going. It's funny. I saw somebody yesterday post on LinkedIn. Do you say please and thank you to AI? Right. Well, you
I
would
do.
guess. I do as well. My daughter, who's 22, said, if robots are going to run the world, I want them to know I'm one of the polite ones. You just like,
Well, it's just habit. Like it's like I would say that to another human if they helped me. So I just kind of like,
absolutely.
why wouldn't I say it to something that's helping me?
But you would, but maybe not everyone in the
Fair.
organization would. So I think it is, again, examples of, when you wrote this, these are 3 different ways that somebody could have read that, right? And so what could we have done to make it easy, calm them? Remember, they're coming in hot and angry, right? And one of the things I always did, if someone comes in hot, almost the worst thing you can do is be the exact opposite of it. In Adam Grant's book, Think Again, he talks about, if you're trying to change someone else's mind, the best way to do it is not to say, well, Kyle said the sky's blue. No, it's not. It's obviously orange. Right? That's super not helpful. It's more helpful to be
Technically,
closer.
it is. See.
I know. See, it can be both blue and orange at the same time. So let's talk about that. Right? And there we already came to an agreement. So a lot of times if people come in hot in a ticket, you need to recognize, right? Teach the engineers to think from that person's perspective. What just happened, right? They are, when we worked with teachers, they are in a classroom standing in front of 30 children who could go crazy at any moment, and they're not able to give a test. That is a stressful situation. Acknowledge that. Oh my goodness, that must be terrible for you. Let's see what we can do to help. Already they're like, oh, that's some empathy. They recognize that I'm in a terrible spot and they don't want me to be there. That statement alone can save you.
Wow. Yeah.
So if they come in hot, you join them, which not everybody thinks like, oh, I should be angry with them, right? I'm trying to calm them down, but you can be empathetic without saying, you know what I mean? Without being angry, mad too.
I always approached it from the perspective of not necessarily being the opposite, but more of understanding why they're there.
Yeah.
Because they don't know why it's not working. They still have a job to do. They're getting yelled at by their boss probably because they're not able to do their job because it's not working. So I never thought of it from that perspective, which is interesting. That's why we do these, I guess.
The other thing that we always thought about was to ask the first question. So are you completely roadblocked to doing more work? Or is there a workaround, right? Or is this an annoyance? Now it takes some nuance to get to that, because if someone is really on fire, if you ask them if that's just a little road, a little blip in the road, they may not feel that way. But I think in triaging, I mean, I don't know how. I suspect everybody, I always think everybody works the same way. That was if a ticket came in and somebody actually could not do the work, even with a workaround, that was an immediate priority. And the engineers dropped whatever they were doing and fixed that. If there was a workaround, that was a tier 2. And a tier 3 was, something hopefully that our tier 1s could address. Exact reverse. I just threw that off with the language.
Yeah. I like to
calm down. No one in the history of ever has calmed down from somebody saying calm down.
Yeah, I've used different language when I have to say that, and I'm like, "Are you upset at me? Did I do something wrong?" And that usually gets people to realize that they should calm down because I'm not the one who's causing that problem.
This totally, I have to tell this. So the other day I called our electric company, and if you go online and check out what they have to say about it, you will see nothing but nasty reviews about the human that answers the phone. And let me tell you, she was nasty for sure. So I called and I got the nasty iteration. And then I called my husband back and said, okay, I've got to call again, but give me some more information. And I called her. And when I did, I said, oh, my lands, I think I'm an idiot and I did something wrong. Can you tell me like how bad I made the problem? And she already wanted to tell me how bad I made the problem, but now I gave her permission to be like, oh no, I think I'm an idiot. This is bad. I screwed something up. Will you be able to help me? And then because she knew I wasn't coming in hot on her, like you did something wrong, even though I was pretty sure she did something wrong. When I said, I think I did something wrong, she was like, well, let's figure out how to get it straight. And we did, because she knew I wasn't going to yell at her.
Yeah, it's I mean, honestly, being in a service-based industry for SaaS or MSP, that's you service, like you have customer service, you have people who something's not working right, either the way they expected or the way that they were told it would. So it's really, really easy to become defensive, answering phones or tickets, just like just something you hop into, because while it's not your fault, they're blaming you in a sense, even if there's nothing like if Microsoft turned off Azure in Office 365, right? They're not calling Microsoft, they're calling you to yell at you because you turned off the Outlook.
Yes. You have the button.
Yeah. So it's I that should obviously be coached from their perspective, but I understand how easy it is to fall into that quote unquote trap of customer service.
The interesting piece is you said, like, how do we get everybody on the team to learn how to communicate better? The better you get at this, the better customer service you, in fact, will get for yourself. Like, practice this in the real world. If you want to go into a store and yell at somebody, think about it from their perspective, right? So what would be a better, that person was not having a bad day and now you're going to come in and scream at them. Is there a way to get them on your side? And when you start thinking of it like that, my parents always joke, they're like, you get away with anything because you're so good at getting good customer service for yourself and setting the expectation, right? So it's that whole, did I make a mistake? I'll call, I mean, heaven forbid, if I have to call the DMV or something, when I finally get a human, I will say, oh my goodness, I hope you're the person that can make my day, right? I got Google on the phone, or nope, it was Amazon. Sorry. I got Amazon on the phone. It's hard to get them on the phone. I was like, oh, please tell me you're the human that can just be my savior today. And they were like, I would like to be your savior today. Great. Now that we have that established, fix my problem. Now, I've got a hot version too, but I always come in with honey first.
So that's my approach, is to be the friendly, understanding. Let's get on the same level and then let's try to work out the problem. And sometimes that's just not effective. It's not like it doesn't get the response that's needed. It doesn't like the person on the phone could be, as gung-ho to solve the problem as much as possible. But sometimes you need the opposite of that. The as you said, hot. I'm not good at that. It's just not in my nature to be forwardly. It's not mean because that's not the right way. It's like super blunt, to the point. And I've worked with an individual for a long time who's very good at that. His name is Mindy Green. For those who don't know, he's very good at just cutting through any nuance that doesn't need to be, and is just straight to the point. And it's a pleasure to see him work when it gets to that point. And because he obviously tries the other side, he's like, forward, let's get on the same path, let's try to work through this problem. But once he understands that the person he's talking to is no longer like that method's not going to work, or he has to go above them and they're not willing to go above them, it's just like, boom, this is the path I'm taking. And it's always been very effective once it gets to that point. And it's I get popcorn out at that point because it's great to watch.
It's fun to watch. I think first, it is one of those, don't take my kindness for weakness, right? So that is where, at some point when it doesn't work and you do have to be direct. So let's be clear. My husband's name is Frank, and it's not just his name, it's his adjective, right? So he will call like he sees it right out of the gate. A random story. One day he got a call from a woman who wanted her burn pile brushed, or her brush pile burned. And he said, ma'am, there's a burn ban in Maryland and I'm not going to burn that. And she said, but I'm having guests here this weekend. And he said, well, the burn pile can't be burned. We could burn down your woods and your house, and doing that, it's not going to happen. And she said, let me put Dr. Chautauqua on the phone. He said, you can put Emperor Chautauqua on the phone. And if they don't lift the burn ban, I'm not doing it. I was like, oh, I can learn from this.
That's what I like, right? That's a Mindy thing. He would say that like very similar thing. And that is just like, it's just at that point, it's just popcorn time and just watching
I don't care who you are. Meanwhile, me with like newborn baby on my hip at the time, had quit my job to be a stay-at-home mom. I'm like, oh, I think we just lost a client. But I think what's important, and I suspect is what is one of Mindy's superhero powers, is if you can get very tactical, right? Like it's sort of like, this strategy hasn't worked, so now we're going to have to get down to brass tacks. And so you just need to be clear on, okay, so Kyle, tell me, what is the blocker that is going to keep me from getting X, Y, or Z, right? So now I'm asking you to identify what's in the way. And if any of that sounds like wants of someone, I really don't care what they want, right? Like this is what needs to happen. What is in the way of us accomplishing this goal? So you're kind of forcing them to think tactics of like, well, what is the problem and how can we pick it apart, instead of getting into a battle of wills. I think that kind of statement helps a bit.
Yeah. So I know we have Reddit posts we could talk about, but I'm enjoying this conversation, so I'm going to continue it. What about interdepartmental? Um, how, what is in your, because obviously the bigger a company grows, the more departments they have, the more communication that tends to happen between, and that has to flow effectively. Otherwise, blockers happen, mistakes happen. So, how do you identify the problems with communication and intradepartmentally, and how do you recommend fixing them?
So, depending on the size of the organization, there can be lots of different strategies to that. As a customer success manager in the company that I worked for, we decided as a company that the quote, keep calm and let customer success handle it, was in fact the center of the spoke. And so we were the connector internally of how a problem would be solved. Now, not all companies work that way, but we did put in place interdepartmental kind of connection. So if you're an EOS shop, right, do you have a one of the meetings where, you get somebody from each department to come to the party to talk about their biggest issues, their biggest pain points, things they're seeing in an open way where everybody knows we're bringing issues to the table, not humans to the table, right? So instead of, well, Kyle was snippy on a ticket, it would be, okay, so we've gotten a few tickets where we feel like the communication piece was gone, was off
Not as
course.
effective.
Not as effective.
The tone was off. There we go. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's very good. So we'd like to talk about what do we need to do to fix that, right? And maybe Kyle immediately says, yeah, I did that. I was pissed. I think what I need to do is just not respond emotionally or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But it could be, actually, we've had 17 of those. So we're going to do some training around the language we use in a tickets. We're going to look at examples and counter examples, that type of thing. So you need to have a process for communicating. The other piece that is really important is that I just read the chat and my brain went aside. I'm going to say it's really important, and then I'm going to forget what I was going to say. So it's important to have a system for that communication, and then document so everybody understands what that looks and feels like. So if you don't have a plan for it, it's one of those, if you have a plan for them or they'll have a plan for you. And that is why team building is important. So I recently did a podcast about team building, and we talked about, so a lot of folks hate icebreakers and silly little things at the beginning of a meeting. And if you're not doing them with a purpose, then they can be silly little fluffy things. But the purpose is to really learn how to communicate with each other and find each other to be humans, right? When I know that you've got, an issue going on, et cetera, it helps to kind of see things from your perspective. So having regular team building, not just within your department, but across the company. And you need to have different types. So as some folks know, I'm not a happy hour girl. So if your team building is always a happy hour, you're never going to know a thing about me, right? Because I'm not going to go. I'm not comfortable at a cocktail party, so I won't be there to show up. So you need to have different ways to connect with people that are, again, small. They don't have to be big things, but icebreakers, opening meeting activities, et cetera, can really help with that.
It's interesting, because I like what you said about discuss the issue, not the human, or bring the issue, not the human.
Yeah, yeah.
It's because it's very apt because people, again, it goes back to the defense. You become defensive because you may be at fault for some or all of it of an issue, and it's not that. I'm always of the opinion, tell me if something's wrong because I don't know if it's broken until you tell me.
Correct.
I'm not going to be defensive about it. I may ask you a bunch of questions in text, and depending on where I'm at mentally, it may sound like I'm mad, but I'm not. But I want to know so that I can work on it and come to a resolution, and try to communicate what the actual problem is. Because if someone comes to me and says, "Hey, this doesn't work," that may not be the actual problem. and I'm going to have to do some troubleshooting and some root cause analysis to determine if the process is broken, is the button that they're clicking not working? Did
Yeah.
someone forget to pay a license fee for something, and now we got to figure out what happened? Did Microsoft shut off Office? And so that is, I think a lot of people struggle with that because they feel like they're calling out someone, and
Yeah.
because they don't want to be called out,
Yep.
they're not reciprocating that communication, even if there is a department. I find a lot of humans are social, right? We love communicating, we love having conversations, doing podcasts, discussing different ideas. But generally, we form little cliques, little social
Yeah.
groups.
Yeah.
Even inside companies, the bigger your company is, the more little social groups you'll have.
Correct.
And they start internally team building. They start internally knowing each other and internally building biases and conversations and airing out their own internal frustrations. And that generally happens with the people they work with closely, right?
Yeah.
So your help desk team may be building up this,
Great culture, but
yeah,
it's isolated.
but it's internal to them. And if something goes wrong with another department, like finance or projects or management or whatever, they're going to complain internally, and
Right.
then
And
the
that's
whole
a
thing sours.
right. Well, and they've got this whole unit, right? That's like, so a mass that's creating the problem. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
why you've got to force people hate it. Well, that's because they're comfortable in their group.
Mhm.
But you absolutely have to stick a help desk person with a finance person in one of the team building activities so they can build a bond as well.
Yeah. And because I don't want to say toxic, because it's not always specifically toxic. It's just there are problems and it's not being communicated. And like let's say finance invoices differently or something. Uh, the reason why they do what they do may have a purpose you don't understand.
Correct. Absolutely.
So yes, that issue that finance is doing that causes you an issue, and you share your issue with your friends and your groups. They're going to take in that bias and take in that complaint and be like, yeah, I agree with you on that. They shouldn't do that. But then it goes nowhere else.
Yeah.
Um,
It's not
it's not,
solving the problem.
no. And even if you do bring it up, because you may at the point to where you get to the point where I'm done, I need to fix this, and you go and bring up the problem to the supervisor or that department, you do it in a way that's aggressive.
Yeah.
Uh,
At that point,
and you,
it's built up.
yep. And you do it, and you're defensive about why you feel the way you do, and the communication just breaks down, and
Yeah.
they can't convey to you why it needs to be that way, even though you may not like it. So you don't, and it just continues to fester, and it causes a lot of problems, and it has to be uh, worked on, right? The
Yeah.
bigger your company goes, the bigger the more this can happen if you don't have team building exercises and you don't
Yeah.
have company meetings and group interdepartmental meetings, right? You need
Yeah.
to spread the love and the culture around.
And it is what makes or breaks a culture, right? Like when you have many cultures in your company, you don't have a company culture, and that alone will cause angst. I recently read, I think it was in Brene Brown's Dare to Lead. There are a couple things that you said that reminded me of some things that she mentioned. One company that she worked with, they had like a battle hour where everybody brought the thing that made them crazy, and they knew they were like going in the arena and we're all going to be angry for a bit, but we're going to try to come up with some outside the box issues. So it was never about a person. It was about, it makes me nuts when we get these issues. And I thought it was pretty hilarious, to be quite honest. But the other thing that she talked about is they used to say when they started a new project, I think this is super relevant for MSPs. What does success look like? The problem becomes that somebody's idea of what the end output looks like may be different from someone else's, and people on the team are afraid to ask, right? So if I said, Kyle, what does success look like? And you're like, success looks like we've onboarded that customer by March 31st. And I'm afraid to ask what you mean by that. I think this is the first step where we're going to see some miscommunication. You didn't miscommunicate anything. I just didn't get enough information for that to be helpful for me, right? In your mind, it's clear as day. So they started implementing, can you paint done for me? And so at this point, you would say, yes, all 30 users have been, switched to our assets. Like, of course, at this point, I'm not going to know any of the technology that you would actually say of what done looks like, but giving the permission to say, Kyle, can you paint done for what you mean we're going to be onboarded by March 31st means? And then you recognize that you need to be really clear about what that output looks like. I think that's a pain-free way of asking the question when you feel like I'm going to feel foolish when I ask him what that means.
That's a good point. Because in the sense of what, in onboarding, done is very subjective to the party.
Right.
Like your customer success manager, done to them may look something different than what your engineering team
And
or
it might look different than what the client's thinking.
That too.
Right? Like they really just wanted the phone systems working by the 31st. And you're thinking, oh, phones can wait. That's easy, right? We're going to set up the server, whatever.
Yep. That's very, I actually had that a very similar issue today, earlier this morning. I was doing some metric calculations and I noticed one that was very off. And I was like, hey, in the past 90 days, you've put in 1,400 hours, and that seems a little off from the standard 488 that you should have, roughly at max. So, and I was like, "Can you do me a favor? Like, here's a report. Verify you can look at this report. This is all the ones that might be erroneous, and just verify what they were." And he's like, okay, how do I do that? So I sent him some screenshots and, arrows pointing on what to click and whatnot. And he's like, hey, can I give you a call? I'm like, yeah, sure. What's up? And then he explained to me that he didn't understand what I was saying because he didn't understand how to get to where he could understand what I was saying. And I was like, I'm glad you called. Fantastic. I love this. I appreciate it because I don't know that you don't understand.
Yep.
And I don't know what to tell you to get to understand until you tell me where you're at.
You have to set up the culture, which means you've done a fantastic job of that so that they are comfortable to ask the question, because you don't want to go into a job not knowing anything. And so it takes a good leader to be able to set the groundwork for that open communication. So well done that he felt comfortable saying, like, I have zero idea what you're talking about.
So I was like, all right, let's start from the beginning. This is why we do what we do. This is why we track the time. This is why it's important. This is what it can affect. And this is how the system tracks the time and where it applies. And we went through, spent about 30 minutes having the conversation. And he's like, all right, I get it. And I'm like, cool. If you have any questions, let me know. He asked a question a few minutes after that. It's like, hey, what about this situation? I'm like, yep, don't worry. Worry about your time entries. Don't worry about someone else's so that you can ignore that. And then he's like, okay, what about this situation? I'm like, well, that doesn't actually matter because you're just looking at something. It's not actually, there's no time tracking. You're just checking on something and there's no actual stuff. So, but yeah, it's being able to have that culture, and failure is okay. And not understanding is okay, as long as we can get to a point to where we're not causing the same mistakes and we're not ignoring the fact that you don't understand and you're just trying to proceed. Because like this, I'm looking at this, like it's going to stay there. It's a metric I look at. It's not going to disappear just because you don't understand. You could fix that one entry I showed you how to fix, and you still got another 1,000 hours worth of time that's got to be rectified. So it is what it is, right? We have being able to feel comfortable with that, super important. I would recommend anyone and everyone to try to foster that culture, and don't berate someone just because they don't know something, I should say. And it's hard to do sometimes too, even for me, because I don't like to be disturbed when I'm doing specific tasks. Like if I'm deep in building KPIs and metrics and deep into math and heavily thinking things, programming is another good example. Is we're just a deep focus.
It takes
Being able to getting pulled out of that can be frustrating. And I have to take a few seconds before I respond so I can be like, all right, I'm out. It is what it is. Someone needs something. It's okay. Deep
yeah,
breath, then respond. And that's a me problem. That's not a them problem. And
right. But it's hard
as an
to.
individual, you have to recognize that.
Oh, and that's so they want to put the link to the personal operating system in the chat. That is something that Ted Lasso did well, right? Speaking of Ted Lasso, let's think about Keeley told him that their star player, who was an egomaniac, Jamie Tart, responded to positive reinforcement, right? So, do you really think that the coach wanted to give positive reinforcement to the human that's behaving like an arrogant child? That yourself, you're like, that my brain is broken on this.
It conflicts with
It
what
can,
you expect.
but he's thinking longer term, right? Take a deep breath. If I give him some positive reinforcement around this, I will also be able to communicate one of the things that he can't hear from me, right? Because he hasn't gotten any positive reinforcement. So I sort of got that same, like, all right, this is not him for not knowing how to do it. I need to take a deep breath and get myself squared away for that.
It's a fast because, and I understand that like on a deep level, because obviously as you watch the show for Ted Lasso, right? The actors in the team did a fantastic job of building these intricate systems and details. But the reason why positive reinforcement works for him specifically is because it's an attention thing. He got negative attention his whole life from his father.
Yep.
For the spoiler
Yep.
alert, and it's something that helps encourage him and push him forward. And it makes sense when you think about the holistic picture, but you don't know until you
Yeah.
understand and you build that
Yeah.
team rapport. And he tells you of his history, and then it clicks to make sense why that type of communication works. And everybody just about communicates differently, and the amount of variation depends, but being able to communicate on multiple levels and understand that you have to communicate on someone else's level sometimes I have to come down to yours. If like someone goes into deep understanding of how an LLM, AI large language model works, I'm going to probably glaze over. They're going to have to use simple words
Yeah. Yeah.
to convey that type of X and Y equals Z formulaic information to me. But sometimes I might be able to go up to their level in specific instances. So being able to recognize as you work, that communication's a problem and everyone has to work on it to make sure it's
Yeah.
like, what is the number one complaint for vendors, for businesses, for people? You don't communicate the way I want you to communicate.
Exactly.
Either via email or a phone call or blasting out on Twitter or whatever. Like, I get my information this way. Please communicate it this
Yeah.
way so that I can get the information I do.
Yeah.
It's a difficult lesson to have to master, and it's not just it's not just how you communicate, but what you communicate as well. And a lot of people will focus on the how you communicate using more tone and more friendly language, but it's also what you're communicating about is also important. And I think a lot of people miss that, especially when they think they have a communication problem in a specific area.
It's funny. It reminds me, my dad was an engineer. My mom was a middle school math teacher who had not taken upper level maths. And I was in calculus and I had a question. And my dad's method of teaching me was to say it over and over again louder. And I would say, I'm dumb, not deaf, Dad. Like, that's not helpful. But I would say to Mom, okay, I'm going to explain the problem to you. Dad, for the record, is still standing over there, right? You're going to ask Dad the question. I'm going to hear him explain it back to you because he's not going to yell at you. And then you're going to explain it to me. And it's kind of funny. Like, that was insanely helpful because what I eliminated was like the yelling, because he just expected me to get it the way he got it. And in that English to English to English to English translation, I learned the math of it. I was listening to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People today, Steve Covey. And he told a story about a man who got on a subway with his 2 kids, and he sat down and just put his head down, and the kids wreaked havoc, ripping papers out of people's hands, and he didn't do anything about it. And the guy next to him finally said, sir, I think, the kids are disturbing other people. You might want to do something about it. And he looked up and said, oh, yeah, I probably should. We're coming from the hospital. My wife just passed away and I don't know how to act. And I clearly neither do the kids. Well, the guy then immediately was like, wait, this
Oh
is
my God.
not about the kids, right? I need to reframe and be empathetic. And how can I help you? So you've got to ask questions to put yourself in the other person's place sometime instead of
Yeah,
just
because at that point you're forming biases. Like that's a bad father. He doesn't pay attention to his kids,
that's
and
exactly
someone
what.
needs to say something to him. And then
Yeah,
you just realize that this individual just lost someone. A traumatic
yeah.
tragedy has occurred in their family, and this guy doesn't know how to handle it, and he's because that. Oh man, that is.
So
You just
the way you fix that, because you couldn't have known that, is to always assume positive, right? Like you never come in hot, like, dude, stop your kids. That it could say like, hey, your kids are are causing a bit of mayhem. Can I help with it? Like you think they might like to come over and hear a story or something, right? Just anything. Don't assume the negative. Assume that there could be something you don't know about, because there
yeah.
probably is.
Now I will also say that it doesn't mean that there's not a negative.
Oh, 100%. You may find that the guy's like, dude, I don't care. Like, I
You're
need to get
bothering me
dressed.
this time.
Well, then you can level up, like you said before, right? And at that point, you become Frank or Mendy, and you're like, we're going to confront this head on. What the people on this subway expect is to not be disturbed by your children. What do we need to
By
do to make
anyone.
that?
Everyone wants to be in our own bubble, you included.
Yes. How do we get your children closer to your bubble?
Yeah.
Please.
That's great points all around. So you mentioned personal operating system.
Yeah.
Will you elaborate on what that actually means?
Yeah. Yeah. So in a business, the operating system are all of the people, products, and processes that you put in place to make things happen. Right. And so it's the who, why, and what or who, why, and how. How about what, why, and how? Let's go with those questions on how a human works, right? So it's your core values, it's your strengths, it's your weaknesses, it's the way you communicate, it's your philosophy, right? So all of those things, you're kind of preset to, like, I am a pleaser person for the most part. If you ask me to do something, I want to say yes to that. And I know that about myself. So the danger of my personal operating system is I could easily be walked over if I don't set my own boundaries and know how I'm going to respond to that. Right. So Ted Lasso was positive, Roy Kent was a tough love mentor. He's going to give it to you straight, but he's going to care deeply about it. So it is
But he
really
won't show it.
No, for sure. He may headbutt you before he gives you a hug, as a matter of fact. So if you think about, like, I truly believe the way you do anything is the way you do everything. Case in point, I like to be productive. I'm a checklist girl. I like to get things done. And that is how I work. That is how I work out. That is how, like, I meal prep on Sundays because it takes me 2 hours to get 7 days worth of stuff done. Right. So how does that play out that means that because I like to be productive, if somebody wastes my time or interrupts me with a question, I tend to get frustrated because I'm like, darn it, I'm not being productive right now. So I have to know that about myself to put in gap time to let things pop up. Otherwise, I make myself nuts, So
So
what's something that would be in your personal operating system?
a deep desire to help others.
But not please your personality the way I am, where you're just going to yes help. You just really want to, like, find a way that would.
Yeah, I'm going to give you my opinion, my advice, and what I would do in the situation. But I'm not going to expect you to do it or follow it.
Okay.
I want you to succeed, and I want to give you it. It's similar to the way I operate. I want information so I can make an informed decision.
So information would be absolutely one of the pieces,
Yeah.
right? Like if somebody asked for something from you or wanted you to do something, if you didn't have enough information, I bet you would be frustrated. That's where you could come up with a communication gap.
Yeah.
She told me to do this, but I don't know why, right? Like, I don't know how. I don't know what's going on.
It's a good point, because it's something I try to reiterate to people as well, is like technicians at an MSP generally don't understand how an MSP operates. Like they don't understand why they have to put in their time. They feel they take it as a negative because it's, why are you micromanaging me? Why is, like, they take it from the wrong way, when in fact that's like part of, like, that's just I guess a benefit from a company perspective, that they get to see what you're doing. But the actual aspect is they get to understand where the time goes. So if are they billing properly? Is the client taking up too much of our time? Is there a machine that's broken too much that we're just constantly having to touch? Right? There's so many benefits from a company perspective that doesn't have anything to do with micromanaging you. That is required for that. It's almost the same thing as having knowing how much pounds of flour that I'm going to spend to make this piece of bread, like, and mass sell it. Right. I got to understand how much flour is going to have to go into that, how much I can buy, and how much available, you're just tracking the same thing. It's just a different type of product.
Yeah.
So yeah, that makes perfect sense. That information is important. It doesn't cripple me, but like if there is information available and I don't have it, I get frustrated. Is I think the key there. If there is no information, I can't get frustrated because there is no information, and I have to make my decision, or make whatever it is to proceed. So that's interesting. I'll have to remember that and constantly tell everyone.
Well, if you know that about yourself, you can set the expectation, right? When you come to me with a problem, please try to, like, you don't want just the global, like, I don't know how to do this. You should come to Kyle with, okay, what have you tried? What information do you know? What information do you not know that he thinks you might have? If they came to you like that, right, you would be set up for success, and so would they. So that is exactly why we did the communication guide and the personal operating system docs. When we share that, we learn that about each other. And then I can come to you set up for success because I know what you're going to want to hear.
Platitudes constantly. So I think that's a good point to end up on. We didn't really cover much of the community aspect of it today, but I'm sure that the community is suffering from these same problems, which is one of the reasons why I brought it up, because I know Marnie is really good at communication and really good at teaching others. So I felt that was some fun to have a discussion on that. So Marnie, thank you for joining me, guest hosting this week. Thank you to our producer in the back, who's operating out of a storage shed.
Doing all the things, yeah. And hope all of our friends at Write a Boom are having fun.
Yeah. FOMO is real. Learn security stuff and have a great time. And on that note, there's no outro video, so I'm just going to say goodbye, and that's it. So bye.
Bye.